streaming Facebook, and I'm just waiting for Aditya to give me the thumbs up. We'll say nothing. You're okay. Bart, you can put your hand down. Okay, thank you very much, everyone. This is another Meet the Gurus session. We are dedicated to technology, business, and entrepreneurship and the ways these have powerfully converged in our lives. Meet the Gurus is sponsored by Starweaver and devoted to spreading knowledge, ideas, and insights in short form. Typically, this will be less than 30 minutes or thereabouts. And you can see us on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, Facebook, YouTube, and other places. And we're looking for your input and feedback. So please post them here. And one of my colleagues will pass them off to us. And with that, I am Paul Siegel, your host. The guru today is Bart Jaworski. I pronounce his name incorrectly, and I do my best. But Bart, thanks for taking the time today.
It was actually a good Polish surnames way to say it, so don't worry, it was really good.
Okay, well, I've gotten better. I've only been to Poland once. I wish I could go many more times. It's beautiful. I think I mentioned you're based in Warsaw, is that correct?
For a few more weeks, yeah, and then I'll be moving to the Microsoft office in Czech Republic.
Yes, as I understand, you are now a product manager at, among other things, the wonderful product we all know it known as Skype.
Yes, this is a little startup project, and actually my heart is a little bit hurt that we are recording this on Zoom while we have such an excellent Skype to use. But this time I'll let it pass. We still have a lot of work to do to make Skype great, and be sure to check it out. It's not what you remember it to be.
Well, one of the things is always interesting as we'll talk about this in a second, and we'll get into your background just after I say this. But what is truly fascinating is the way in which products evolve, and how often it's related to, does the person really know what the product features are and what are there and what are the opportunities. So I just find it fascinating. But with that said, tell me a little about yourself. Let's introduce you to the audience, and so we can have an understanding of where you're coming from.
So as Paul already said, I'm Dr. Bart Jaworski. I'm a senior product manager at Microsoft. I have a long way of different companies and a fine career track as a product manager, where I started in a very small startup where I was stuck for almost a decade, which was first an adventure and then a little bit of burden when you wanted to move on with your career, but you simply didn't know how to be a great product manager because all you did was a single startup. But then my subject matter expertise allowed me to move on to a European job board company called Stepstone, where I managed to master the craft. And from there, after 2 years, I moved on to OLX, which is Europe's and Africa's and Asia's biggest classified ads company. And now, after all the years of gathering knowledge, I am here as a guru. I've been accepted to Microsoft, and seriously, I still can't believe it happened for me. And I'm also here to help you guys, you other aspiring product managers, to step up, to get the dream job. And since I got that difficult journey past me, I'm happy to show you the breadcrumbs and to share what I learned over the years to make the journey easier for you guys.
Yeah, and you have a course that's coming out on our platform now, or it's just released. If not, it's going to be released by next week. So it's very exciting to have you here. So let's follow some of those breadcrumbs. You have a fantastic background, obviously, and so who is a product manager, and what does she actually do?
Well, I have two definitions. First is like this, the one I'd like students to share on the job interviews, which is the proper one, that a product manager is a person who leads a product that solves a problem using a team of talented individuals and technology in order to deliver value. And this definition encapsulates everything that's important. Mm-hmm. The fact that product manager is not alone, and he's a team spirit person that requires a good community to do his job properly.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that it's not about doing features for the feature's sake, but to generate value, to understand what users need, and making sure that you are taking the right direction. Obviously, the technology part is to distinguish the product managers who are focused around buying the cheapest clothes from Asia to retail stores, and make sure that we are talking about the IT product manager,
Mm-hmm.
because that's also very important.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, that's the right definition. But there's also the very pragmatic definition of the product manager is the person who your manager tells you to be when you're hired. So for us, product managers, it's very important on the recruitment stage to make sure that we know what we are getting ourselves into. Because there is very often a big misunderstanding on what the position should incline in theory. You might be called a product manager, but indeed become a project manager, which is very different.
Mm-hmm.
Product manager is the captain who leads the ship. Project manager will be his XO, executive officer, who's responsible of keeping the ship afloat, keeping the crew happy and their bellies full. But that's a very different thing. It's not a leadership position. It's a technical position that makes sure that the deadlines and milestones are kept.
Right.
And when you go to a company thinking that you are to look for value, to do research, to be an inspiring leader, and you end up being the person who fills out the timetables and making sure that the deadlines are fulfilled, that can be really disappointing.
So the roles obviously can be distinguished in part not distinguished, but the roles that someone takes on, first of all, probably should be distinguished. But regardless, if you're in a small company, they'll probably be more put together. Bigger companies having hopefully more infrastructure and more thought process involved have broken these further apart. But still, even in a small company, you probably, in your role, need to be able to articulate that, okay, now I'm managing the product, okay, now I'm managing the project. And you probably need to articulate that to your team in order to have a quality result. Is that a fair way of describing it?
Yes, you can clearly see that there's a spectrum where you begin as a project manager or even a person who is like an assistant to the actual product manager, which in a small startup can be the CEO who has the real power and makes the real calls. And then once the company scales, the project scales, you also need to focus your efforts. With a small team, a beginning project, it's okay for a product manager to be also a project manager. There's like a handful of people and everyone wants to deliver the success. And there's absolutely no sense in looking for textbooks to distinguish what a job title needs to mean. But if the project and product grows and there are more and more developers, more and more responsibilities, and more things to look after, the product manager can no longer sustain all of that. And that's when you need to make the distinction. Obviously, in the modern development teams, you hardly ever see a project manager because the coding framework called Agile Scrum, which is the most popular one, which is focused around delivering value to users in small intervals, will put that project manager position inside the dev team so that every developer is responsible for his own deadlines, for his own milestones. And this is actually great because this grows the team, makes them feel more responsible for the product. And also it helps them not to feel like a worker in a factory. They are there to contribute and to make sure that the whole team succeed, and they are not just there to type in the keyboard for 8 hours a day.
So what part of the product manager's role is describing the product in broad terms, and what time? I mean, so sort of in broad terms, like here's what our product does overall, but here's why it does this and why it's so important, and this is less important. Or how does the product manager articulate this? Literally, is it in PowerPoints? Is it verbally? Is it all the above? I mean, what are the tools that you use to articulate the product vision to the team?
I would say it's not about tools. It's about more of a mental concepts. it's about, first of all, creating a vision for the product. So creating a destination you want to achieve. It's sort of like the super ego in the Freud's schema of an ego, it, and yourself. Ego, super ego, and it, where the super ego is the optimal, the perfect version of you, and that's the vision. Then you need to figure out a strategy to get to this vision. So it's no longer so high level. Strategy would be tangible ways of achieving the vision. It would be to describe that I'm going to take a car on this road. This car will be powered by fossil fuels. This journey needs to be comfortable. It needs to be still high level, but something that the team can relate to. And for example, if a product manager is away for his sabbatical, sick leave, or simply on his holidays, then it can't be that the team doesn't know what to do. There's always some intellectual concept that allows team to proceed without the actual captain on the bridge. Right? The ship can still float, still sail in the right direction. With having those high-level items, then it comes down to the backlog, to creating the content for this backlog, to defining how will we measure the success and whether we are fulfilling the vision and strategy. Those are usually KPIs, key performance indexes, or more modernly OKRs, objective key results, and those are similar but not, because the KPIs are just usually numbers that you measure, and OKRs are like a step above it, because you look for a specific goal of improving the quality of onboarding, so that we can have more users stay with the app, for example. That can be an OKR, which obviously translates to some KPIs, don't get me wrong, but it's always, we people are not machines. We do not like thinking about numbers. We like to think about concepts. We like to visualize stuff, and those OKRs are quite helpful with that.
Okay, so is that where you begin? Does the product manager begin with establishing the vision for the product, and then breaking it down into these OKRs that will define parts of the experience of the product that are measurable, and then from there take those parts that are measurable and establish KPIs, the numbers that we measure?
All of that, and aside from that, we also need to be very focused on solving the problem, as I mentioned in the definition. There is a bad tendency sometimes with product management to forget that it's not about a feature creep, so putting additional features on top of it just so it has a broader appeal. I can even use Skype here. Obviously, as a Skype product manager and the whole Skype team, we are aware that the product didn't go the right way for some time in the past. And the bad example here would be Skype Stories, when the Stories feature became very popular and everyone started pushing it into their own products. I still don't understand why LinkedIn has Stories. And it's something that we are now seeing with Clubhouse, where someone created an app, an audio meeting app, and podcast app with free access, and now every product in the world wants to mimic this because they found it's successful. But you have to, as a good product manager, ask yourself, the fact that Clubhouse works, will it work for our product? Does it make sense? Does it solve the problem we came here to solve? Does it fit our vision? Does it fit our strategy? Is there a market for it? Then there's the issue of focusing on features over problem solving, and is also then further worsened if you forget that you are in the business of, well, generating value in business. Because if you do a feature creep, those features will not help your monetization, will not help your business, and business that's not thriving won't create great products. And there's nothing shameful in thinking that I'm creating something that's great and which is supposed to generate money, grow my business, pay the salaries of my employees, and there's nothing to be ashamed of in this construct, which is how the world operates. And I think that sometimes people forget that the companies do not create products for amusement's sake only.
Right. So in that case, I think maybe you're describing, and tell me if I'm wrong, that you're discussing that, in fact, just because another guy has a feature that's really cool in a product that might supplement yours, it might actually dilute the utility of your product. Like
and it might hurt it.
Might hurt it. So I'm going to use a bad example, but if you have Skype and you suddenly start selling products in Skype, hey, look at all these people using Skype. Maybe they want to buy products because they're connected. I mean, someone might say, hey, they're all connected. Look, we could sell products to them, but that's not why they came to use Skype. Now, maybe I'm letting something out of the bag that Skype is intending to do, so I don't want you to disclose anything. But seriously, is there an element of just because you can, should you? Just because you can sell a product in Skype, and don't use that as an example, but I mean, I used it for simplicity. Should you sell a product in Skype?
Well, don't be afraid that Skype will start becoming a retail product because the Zalando product manager won't return my calls to craft this cooperation. But jokes aside, yeah, completely. It's all about the focus. And recently I've been inspired by a sentence which doesn't say too much, but it was clearly said that less is more.
Right.
And that also encapsulates something that I learned many years ago in a startup of a mantra that says quality over quantity.
Sure.
And if you can do fewer things better, but not perfectly, to the Pareto level of 80% good,
sure,
then you are on the right way to succeed with your product.
So this could be a two-sided question. Is the greatest challenge and the biggest screw-up as a product manager? The greatest challenge in some ways seems to clarify this vision and then implement it. Maybe I'm wrong, but please tell me that. And then secondly, what's the biggest screw-up that you either have witnessed, maybe better used just an example of what you've witnessed, and how was it corrected or not?
Let's start with the greatest challenge. For me, looking at different product managers, talking to different people, I think it all comes down to the question when to make a decision. Because I always see good product managers on a spectrum for people who are over analytical and will commission many research, will look at many numbers, and will literally take forever to make any decision just to make sure that it's the right decision. And on the other end of the spectrum, there are people who make rush decisions, who are eager to test something, to put it out and see what happens. And if you can imagine this as a scale from, say, -10 to 10, it's finding the right value for your product, for your stage of development, for your life cycle point for your product. I myself always would put myself in this -10, 10 on a 3, 4. I am very eager to put something out, but that's also a growth curve for me to make sure that I know to ask why, to always have the vision and the strategy and the OKRs be at the back of my head, and make the right calls. Because this can result in either making a right call too late and being late to the party, or generating a big screw up because you made a rash decision that made no sense. You lost time, you didn't gain any value, and you could have worked on something more beneficial if you took the time to analyze the situation. And well, I don't have a screw up of my own to share that would be too meaningful to this conversation. Or maybe I have. Actually, this is like my first lesson in product management, and I think the only very bad product decision I ever made. Obviously, it's not that every decision made later was perfect or even good, but it's not something that I couldn't justify or wasn't dictated by the circumstances. The story I have here is about like my really first product decision when I just took product management baby steps in my product management career in that startup I mentioned initially. It's still up, of course. It's called EvidenceBased, and my problem was that I thought that I know what the users want without asking them. The product which is developed is basically a tool that allows you to quickly post one job advert to several job boards at the same time in one cumulative web form. So what I did was I issued, I don't want to say AI, but an intelligent way to select fields specific to every job board based on the title and description. On paper, it looked great. We had a message that we save your time, that we are quicker than the competitors. And when it was released, we found out that nobody cared. In fact, people were upset that the interface is more complicated and they don't really understand what's going on despite newsletters and information.
Right.
It really barely made as a marketing bullet point on the flyer, and it ended up an option that's disabled by default, and you can enable it if you want to. But what clients really wanted wasn't the speed. They already got it with the basic product. There was enough time saving. They wanted the confidence, and they wanted us to make sure that the ads we put out perform perfectly, that the SEO is optimized, that the ad that's being reposted is for sure on the top of the search results, and many other aspects that I ignored, thinking that speed is the key. But did I make a questionnaire? Did I call many clients that I had personal relations back then, because I came from a client management, client support background? No, I was full of myself. I was pretty sure I know how can I contribute to business, and that was a moment of humbleness that still resonates to this day with me.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because this gets to my next question, which is about tools that you might use to test that, whether testing or querying, or questing is really more of a tools to help you figure out which of those priorities are customer priorities. And I'll use my own example, but then I'll give you a moment to think about some of yours. We were deciding on what to put on a web page, and we used a tool called Usability Hub. We took a snapshot of the web page for $70. We got 50 people to within 15 minutes, because they cultivate the audience, to tell us where people would click. And you got an opportunity to show them an image of the page, ask them where they would click on the page, and then you would ask them a question: why did you click here? The next question is, what did you expect to find when you got there? And the third question is, what does this company do? Now, you could add any curious questions. I don't know how many they offer, but literally someone gives you this test in minutes. We were shocked. We were shocked to learn what people clicked on, because, I would have said image, there's a big image, people click on an image, but they clicked on something totally different, and they told us exactly, and interestingly, it really helped us clarify what the priorities were. So that's just one example. Maybe you use other tools, but that one, someone introduced it to me, and I thought, wow, this is really powerful to get 50, and the fact is that I didn't have to go out and say, hey, my friends and cousins and relatives, could you help me? Because they're going to think about it differently. These were completely random people. And by the way, I could select their age, I could select their gender, I could select their region and their country. So that's an example. I'm sure there are other tools that you might find that you like.
I really like to observe something similar to what you described, which are heat maps, which tell me on a larger scale on what's going on. And I also liked before the era of GDPR, it was more common to simply record your user's screen and see what they're clicking. Like you would record every 10th session. It would just capture every 10th frame, and that would give you an idea without asking the user, just to sneakily observe them to see what's going on.
Right.
Obviously, that was before the privacy was an important subject to consider. It was always important, but there was no political pressure to really focus on that and create experiences that have privacy at the forefront.
Sure.
Now it's much more tricky to get good software that does it, because it has to hide user logins, emails. Those companies still survived, as far as I know, but it's not as obvious as it used to be. And then you have to disclose to the users. They might think that you are spying on them, and this will lead you to losing clients. It became a moral conundrum to use this kind of software. But what I really enjoyed using is Adobe Analytics, which obviously you need to know your data. It's pretty, every good product manager is data driven. But what Adobe Analytics did is they created a very, stupid friendly, I can say, way of people like myself who are not data analysts from my background. I know data analytics, I know what to look for, but what Adobe Analytics allowed me would be to simply drag and drop information I needed and very quickly create tables or funnels I could observe, and without the need of using time of my business analyst team, could quickly answer the questions I had without issuing a task and waiting for it to be completed. I really like that software, and so far it's the best one I used in terms of spying on the users in a very moral and correct way.
It's interesting because it used to be that people would think you'd have to make a decision, and then you rely on the decision and you defend it in some sort of salesmanship way, right? This is why, this is great, and I've heard. But now, because of this ability to kind of drill down, and as you said, using Adobe Analytics or others, you can actually provide what I call evidence, right? It's like evidence-based selling. You don't need to sell based on your good looks or convincing dialogue. You can say, look at the chart, and the chart says this. So we can interpret that chart differently. But and then you slice the data and you flip it around and you look at it differently. And before you know it, everyone comes to the same, and everyone's heads are bobbing, right? They're all saying, that looks to be the answer.
It really sounds like the products have made a transition how poker did. When years ago, poker was about actorship, about faking tells and doing all this theater around you, and now it's about the Harvard and MIT kids who can learn, who can count probability in their heads easily, and all that people with funny hats and mustaches are no longer the ones who win the big poker stakes.
Right. No, exactly. And it's kind of a data-driven product. It's a data-driven world that we're in right now. I still have the question in my back of my mind is kind of like, we talked about what's the greatest challenge. I'll use one example, and maybe I'll use two. So I always think of HP Alta Vista, with the first major search engine, which was, pre-Google, and very simple, very easy. And people will try to tell you, as one of my relatives did, the reason Google was successful is they have an end-by-end matrix that allows you to find better information online. And my answer to that is, I think the reason Google did so well is because they realized you could advertise around a search. That if you're searching for guitar, you might want to buy it, or you might want to buy music, and there are people willing to pay you for that. Whereas the people who were the product managers inside HP were trying to convince their boss that, maybe there are a few hundred companies that would want to, buy their search technology, but it really wasn't the search technology that was the value proposition. It was what you could find and who would want to advertise as a result of the search. So it was your product your product wasn't the search, it was the results. It was what are people looking for and why do they want those things?
Yeah, and it's amazing if you think about Google. When you think Google, you think search engine, you think videos, you think Office suite, you think Gmail, but all they are is actually an advertising company, right, which sells you the opportunity to give them data to give you better advertisements. And
right.
That's so funny when you drill it down this way.
Yeah, and so that often your product may be used for one thing, but the value proposition to the company or to its ultimate customers, right, the real people who pay, the organizations or people that pay, might be quite different. It might be the data underlying it, like the fact that we all can look back on our maps and say, along this route, I don't know why I got a chocolate advertisement on my route to Denver. Oh, well, because I like chocolate, and there's a chocolate store nearby, or something like that, right? It's the understanding of your product. I'm thinking about this and just asking the question. I'm thinking about from the product. The product is often not the four square walls in the product, right? It's the utility to its stakeholders. Is that a good way to put it?
It's a means of generating value to make it very broad and universal for everyone. So the value can be like for Google, those videos, those free, very good email server. And with this value also comes the value generation for Google in terms of advertising space. So that's how I would put it.
Mm-hmm. And as you're building out the product, as you were sort of describing, you have to keep that vision in mind, and probably keep the vision in mind for multiple stakeholders, right? What's the vision in mind for the multiple stakeholders, and then balance those components.
Indeed, that's correct.
So it's fascinating speaking with you. I think that product management, at least in my experience, it's among the most followed courses we have. It's among the most fast evolving field, and I really appreciate your time in giving us your insights into the field, and looking forward to your courses launching as well as your participation in all of our things going forward.
It's a pleasure. Don't mention it.
Thanks again, Bart.